Coming up, the Rio Grande, Chicago and Northwestern, Conrail, the J, and more. That's right, old engines from fallen flag railroads are all in one place, and it's not a museum. Welcome to the Hartwell, a 21st century railroad that's stuck in the past. And we're taking a look at this unique operation next. We'll start our journey about 95 miles northeast of Atlanta in the small town of Leonia, Georgia. It's November 18th, 2024, and sitting here is my favorite member of the Hartwell Railroad fleet, an Electromotive Division GP9 built way back in 1957. It's still wearing the paint from its previous owner, the Chicago and Northwestern. That company was bought by Union Pacific in 1995. Of course, the C&W was a Midwestern railroad, but this unit somehow found its way to the Deep South. And listen to this. Yeah, it still runs. There are actually two more fallen flag locomotives sitting in Leonia too. Behind that Chicago and Northwestern unit, an old Conrail GP38 from 1971. And on a nearby siding, a Richmond, Fredericksburg, and Potomac GP35 built in 1965. Oh, and here's another classic coming down the tracks right now. That's an EMD ST38 built in 1970, formerly owned by the Elgin, Joliet, and Eastern, also known as the J. Behind that, a GP40 built in 67, wearing the colors of the St. Lawrence and Atlantic Railroad. The train will be stopping here in Leonia for a few minutes. They'll actually be taking this C&W locomotive with them on part of their trip today. That'll do. Now, before this Hartwell crew leaves Leonia, they'll be using 4556 to drop off a few cars. The customer here makes industrial packaging products. And how about this? A beautiful Porsche 911 crossing paths with this old GP9. All right, with 4556 coupled up to the back of the train, it's time to depart. The train is now on the outskirts of Leonia on its way to switch another customer. And it seems the trees have grown up around the railroad. Minutes later, the train is coming to a stop in Bowersville to drop off a tank car. While they finish up their work, we're going to get ahead of the train and wait for it in downtown Bowersville. Today, I found one of the most unusual members of the Hartwell roster sitting here. This is an old General Electric 125-tonner that was built in 1964. Like all of the Hartwell's locomotives, this one still wears the paint job from its previous owner, in this case, Georgia Power's plant branch. And behind this oddity, an EMD GP35 built in 1965, wearing a very recognizable paint scheme. This unit was once owned by the Denver and Rio Grande Western Railroad. And here's something you won't see much of anymore on cars and locomotives, a car track tag. From the late 60s until the late 1970s, railroads used these early barcodes to identify rail cars and locomotives. However, this attempt at automated equipment identification did not work. The tags became hard to read by trackside scanners if they got dirty or weren't properly maintained. And AEI, or automatic equipment identification tags, using radio frequency technology are now the standard on rail equipment today. This locomotive has clearly seen some miles, and it's unclear if it's currently active. Anyway, here comes the train we've been chasing, now with only one car and that Chicago and Northwestern locomotive in tow. This next stretch of track runs right through people's front yards. I think this would make me seasick. Check out all this rocking and rolling. Not long after passing through Bowersville, the train is stopping in Royston, Georgia to deliver this car to a lumber company. After getting the bigger engines out of the way, the crew uses number 4556 to spot this car onto the property here. Those two other locomotives might be too heavy for the track here, but that's just a guess. The crew would ultimately leave number 4556 here and proceed south. Now just light engines, here's the train passing by the depot in downtown Royston. As you can see in my final shot of this train, the track on the Hartwell isn't perfect, but hey, they make it work. The curve here actually looks like it was refurbished fairly recently. Those look like newer cross ties. Okay, we're now going to break off from the chase and take a look at the railroad's shop. This is along the original route from Bowersville to Hartwell, Georgia, and the right-of-way is mostly used for car storage now. There wasn't any activity at the shop when I was here, and Hartwell number 454 was the only locomotive in sight. This is an EMD SD7 built in 1953 for the Bessemer and Lake Erie Railroad. It's clearly been scavenged for parts over the years. And how about this? The shop building itself actually has two boxcars built into it. Nearby, another oddity. This was an electric multiple unit car that operated in the northeastern U.S. at some point. The Hartwell used it in an attempt to bring a scenic railway to its line many years ago. Now, the history of this short line is just as interesting as its present-day operations. The railroad dates all the way back to 1878. The original line was narrow gauge and went from Hartwell to Bowersville. The Southern Railway took control in 1902 and converted the tracks to standard gauge in 1905. The Southern would eventually sell the line to local businessmen in 1924. And in 1990, the line was purchased by Benny Ray Anderson. In addition to the line from Hartwell to Bowersville, the railroad also runs from Toccoa to Elberton on former Norfolk Southern tracks, and that's the route the train was running on in this video. Sadly, B.R. Anderson passed away in 2022 at the age of 87. He also owned the Great Walton Railroad and the Athens line. Both of those operations also have some interesting locomotives on their rosters. I was actually able to experience the Hartwell firsthand during a trip with NARCOA, or the North American Railcar Operators Association. We rode the line from Bowersville to Toccoa, then came back to Bowersville for a ride south down to Elberton. I'll leave a link to that trip in the end screen. Now, before we close out this video, I'd like to point out that at the time of this recording, this channel is getting really close to 100,000 subscribers, so if you could help me reach that milestone, I'd really appreciate it. Anyway, that's it for now. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.